Well, I think we all know that feeling when an experiment didn't really quite work out the way you thought it should. And you have that sinking feeling that maybe you should give up. And this is a tough decision, and this video is about that. So to start out, let me start out by saying that there are various ways how you can maybe minimize the risk of failure. You cannot completely exclude failures. Failures will always happen in experiments, not just in experiments, but also in other types of studies, be it research synthesis or conceptual work. There's always the possibility of failure, but there's various ways how you might be minimizing the bad types of failures, and there's a video about that. I recommend that you watch it if you haven't seen it yet. But be that as it may, and if you've still done everything to minimize the probability of failure, things can still go wrong, and then you are faced with this decision on what to do. Should you keep on trying with this experiment, or should you make a cut and start new? So first, about why it is so hard to give up on something that you have already invested a lot of time in. It's a cognitive bias, and it's called the sunk cost fallacy. What does that mean? It means you, in your decision on what to do next, you consider the costs that you have already occurred in terms of time and effort spent on this project in your decision on what to do next. When in fact you should just be thinking about, from now on, what do I do? How do I best invest my time, and not consider the investment that you have already made. This is the fallacy bit. And it clearly, of course, comes from your realization that you have spent a lot of time on this, like to set up an experiment, or you have done a literature research for a particular synthesis exercise, or you have already wasted basically, or spent a lot of time, let's say, thinking about a certain concept, and then you're coming to this impasse. But you've already spent so much time on setting it up, gathering the literature, and or making this conceptual progress that it just becomes hard to give up. So in other words, in your weighting of your decisions, you should be thinking about what can you do with your time now? How do you now, going forward, spend your time more productively? And you should not consider the time you have already spent on a certain project. And this is tricky to do, right? Because there is always this doubt that if you measure just another response variable, or if you think about it a little bit longer, or if you do your literature research a little bit more, then you will find something that rescues you. This is in the back of our mind. But chances are it's not going to happen. So when should you really give up and move on? Well, when you feel that thinking about a certain experiment and the way it's developed, it really just zaps your energy. It makes you feel down. And you can't really see how this is going to ever amount to anything useful. And when it starts affecting your general outlook on things, then I think maybe then it's time to move on and just make a cut and start new again. What do you need to consider also is like the next step. Right? What would be the next step in this measurement? Is the next measurement just going to be one that's really time consuming or expensive? Like, have you measured like the plant biomass? And now you would be measuring microbial community composition using high throughput sequencing, or something that's very time consuming, expensive, and difficult. Then maybe don't do that, right? If the first step is not giving you any clear indication of success, if that next step is going to be harder, more difficult, more time draining and expensive, maybe don't go that next step. Or when in the course of your conceptual thinking exercise, you are faced with the possibility of now having to dive into a whole nother body of literature, maybe then don't do it, because it's already not been promising. Other factors to consider is, like, is this relatively easy to set up again as an experiment, for example? Or was this just did it take months to set this up? This will basically also factor in your decision. If it's really easy to set up again, just set it up again if it doesn't look promising, because chances are something just went wrong, and maybe you can learn from what has happened a little bit, but then just let go and move on. If this was really a gigantic effort to have set up, or to have collected literature for, you've been thinking about this for a long time, well, then maybe you can still cut your losses and basically stop it, but you can still save some smaller bits of it before you move on, right? Maybe you can use just the subset of like the treatments if this was an experiment, not the full set of the experiment, but maybe there was something in a subset of the treatments that you can salvage and move on and at least learn something from. And of course, always keep the big picture in mind. If you're a PhD student, will further working on this experiment really help me get my PhD? Or would I be better off starting new and having a fresh chance at something where then maybe works out better and has more promising results? But of course, this goes for any other career stage as well. Ask yourself, what is your goal? And is this likely really to hit your goal or help you reach that goal if you keep working on this experiment when it really doesn't look good, or this conceptual exercise or data synthesis project? Now, about the decision making, I think it's also important to realize that while it's mostly probably your decision because you're the person that has done this experiment, make sure that you're not alone in the decision making. It's very good to talk to close colleagues, or if you're a PhD student or postdoc, it's very important to talk to your supervisor, of course, and get them on board and share your doubts with them and see what they recommend. And then, of course, in the end, it becomes more of a joint decision, not just your decision. I think that also makes it much easier on you. You don't have to take this decision completely on your own. Finally, what are the consequences of you giving something up? Of course, this is never nice. You know, we don't like things to go wrong and fail, and as wasted effort, and it's much better if things work out clearly. But with all that, be kind on yourself. I mean, don't beat yourself up over that failure. And these things happen all the time. I mean, there wasn't a PhD, I think, in this lab, including my own PhD, where things didn't go wrong. In my PhD, a lot of things went wrong, for example. So this is, I think, just a normal occurrence in science. And it's how you deal with that that is a big determinant of your success. So don't beat yourself up over it. Look forward and see how you can achieve your goals, be it PhD or be it another postdoctoral appointment or faculty position. And another way to think of this is that maybe this was a high-risk project, right? I mean, there's different kinds of projects. If this was a high-risk project, you knew from the beginning it had a probability of failure. So you don't need to really beat yourself up about it then going wrong. Or maybe it was the first time you really did something, either at all, or maybe it was the first time that you did something in a lab where there was no real prior experience with that sort of approach or method. Well, make sure you also draw the lessons from this experiment. If there's something that you have learned from this experiment, make sure you write that down in your notes, right? So that it doesn't completely just appear like a block of time that was good for nothing. This is hardly ever really the case, right? Mostly you have learned something. Even you gained experience with setting up an experiment, like how that exactly works is not trivial at all, even for the simplest of experiments, and you have already gained like some experience for that. Or maybe you could, by some measurements, glean a little bit of something what might be important when you set this up again, like getting the roots colonized with certain fungi, or what soil to use, or which soil didn't work well, or which plants didn't perform well in your greenhouse, whatever the case is. I mean, it's going to be almost impossible to not learn something, even from something that went wrong, or not as planned anyway. Well, if you're ever in a situation like this, well, I hope you're not, but chances are you will be at some point. Things will go wrong. Then I hope you will remember the message from this video. Go through this as detached a way as possible, as the points that I've outlined here. Remember that sunk cost fallacy. It's going to be always in the back of your mind as you're making that decision. But alone remembering that, I think, will help you go forward and make the right decision. Anyway, and also do remember that you're not alone in this. Always talk to others. And then if you decide to do it again, good luck with your experiment. And thanks for watching. See you in the next video.